You are Raul Colcher, yeah, and you are IEEE Life Senior Member, and you're also the CEO of Questera Consulting. And so
Right.
you've had a long history in working in the cybersecurity field, and a long history working in communications. And of course, what's interesting is all these things are kind of coming together. We have this world today where there's lots of devices, everything is connected, everything is online. At the same time, everything is talking to each other. There's a lot of maybe some unanticipated effects, some unintended consequences. And so I wanted you to talk about that. What are sort of the big challenges in cybersecurity, given the idea where we have lots and lots of devices and they all are talking to each other?
Okay, then. Thanks for having me in this conversation. And so, when you talk about challenges in cybersecurity, I think we're talking about a continuous race between attackers and people that think about possible countermeasures to minimize the risks involved with those attacks. The field of security is basically what you have for combating the attackers with countermeasures, plus this encouragement of the attacks by having appropriate regulatory, legal, and punishment measures. Since the latter is basically in the hands of governments, and nowadays you have problems of different kinds in having concerted actions by governments and this in handling those threats. What rests for the defense people, for people that are thinking about the countermeasures, are precisely using the latest possible technology and the most advanced and most effective technologies to counter these attacks.
So I want to get into some of those countermeasures and some of those responses, but I think first I want to set the stage a little bit. So I think in the past we've viewed sort of hackers were often maybe these individually motivated people. Maybe they're interested in mischief, maybe they weren't. Can you talk a little bit about, but what are like sort of these modern, who are the people who are creating these modern threats, and what is their motivation? What is their particular interest in IoT devices? Why is they focusing on this so much that now we feel that threat?
That's a very interesting question. Exactly. In the past, you had individual hackers, people that just for fun or for commercial interest or for different motivations, but individually, they built those threats and implemented those attacks. Nowadays, it's a much more professional field, and it's much more a game for organizations of different kinds, and more recently, even governments entered this game, since cybersecurity became cyberware in many respects, and so we are facing increasing levels of sophistication in threats because the actors involved are no longer individuals, but organizations, well-funded organizations, and even in some cases, countries, governments. Mm-hmm. So that's a big problem, mm-hmm. and it affects not only the level of investment needed to countermeasure those threats, but also the level of work that has to be done on multilateral fora and mm-hmm. standards bodies and every place where these subjects are discussed, because there are interests not always clear, sometimes mm-hmm. hidden interests mm-hmm. that are associated with these problems, and that are very difficult to deal with, mm-hmm. increasingly complex.
So I guess in terms of like understanding the nature of the problem, and sort of developing these responses, what kind of the roles that data science and analytics can play in sort of anticipating threats and really letting us understand, what is the nature of the threat. So maybe we're not seduced by something that's very high profile and makes headlines, but is not a really significant threat, and much deeper and more dangerous things are slipping under the radar.
Okay, if you look into the past for dealing with threats like viruses or other forms of potential threats, the way to deal with those were basically on our case by case collecting the information and trying to deal with the threats as they appeared.
Mm-hmm.
But that is proving not sufficient nowadays for various reasons. And one of the reasons is precisely because we're dealing with increasingly complex networks. Networks not only initially we had networks of people, then we had networks of people and processes like accessing websites and things. And nowadays we have networks of people's processes, devices, all of that in very large and increasingly complex networks. And of course, applications are more and more critical in the sense that if you're dealing with a healthcare application, you're probably hacking some system that might affect life for people, or if you're dealing with a large system for a critical application in the industry, you might be dealing with possible effects on stopping critical systems, affecting environment, affecting the life for populations around large plant or things like that. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, when you're dealing with machine-to-machine IoT, mm-hmm. You gotta have the ways not only to deal with the threats that are coming, but also to deal to foresee, to forecast, and to forecast what threats will be more likely to come. You have to collect data on the profiles and the history and the behavior of the attackers, and that is the field where we're going to have big data and analytics and data sciences helping us to identify and deal with the threats that are likely to come, not present.